If a wedding is the happiest day of a woman's life, then why was she quietly falling apart behind a closed door? The room was quiet, too quiet, not the gentle kind that wraps around you like a blanket, but the heavy kind that presses on your chest, waiting for you to break. Alara Bennett sat at the edge of a bed that didn't feel like hers anymore, her hands shaking against her face. Somewhere beyond the door, muffled voices whispered of duty, debt, and disgrace. But inside the room, time had stopped. The dress, hanging motionless on a wooden chair, gleamed with cold perfection. Layers of white lace and silk, meant to celebrate a union of love, now felt more like a costume for sacrifice. Alara didn't see beauty in it, only surrender. A uniform she'd been forced to wear in a battle she never chose. Everything around her crystal chandeliers, marble floors, gold-framed portraits had once stood for legacy and power. Now it all felt hollow. Her family wasn't hosting a wedding. They were orchestrating a transaction, and she was the currency. The door swung open with a sharp creak, cutting through the stillness. Her mother, Celine, walked in like a storm wrapped in pearls. Behind her was Malcolm, Ilara's father, eyes cast downward, as though even meeting his daughter's gaze might shatter what little courage he had left. Enough of this nonsense, Ilara, Celine said sharply, eyes fixed on the untouched dress. Put it on, now. Ilara's voice cracked as she tried to speak, her lips barely moving. I don't want this. It isn't right. Celine exhaled, not with sympathy, but with impatience. And you think life is ever fair? We're drowning, Ilara. Your father and I are trying to keep this family from being humiliated, from losing everything. And you're worried about what's fair? Tears slipped down Ilara's cheeks, not from heartbreak, but from years of silent exhaustion. Why me? She whispered. Why not Mira? She's always been your pride, your everything. The truth had finally clawed its way out unfiltered, vulnerable. Her older sister, Mira, had always been the shining star. She was adored, praised, protected, while Ilara learned to survive in the shadows. Celine's eyes narrowed, her voice laced with sharp clarity. Mira was born to rise. You were born to endure. She wouldn't survive this, Ilara. But she paused, her gaze piercing. You're strong enough to carry the burden. Ilara laughed, bitter and broken. No, I'm not strong. I'm just invisible enough that you can use me without guilt. From behind, Malcolm finally spoke, his tone so faint it nearly disappeared into the silence. Let's not fight. She knows what's expected. Ilara turned toward him, pleading for something, anything, but he only looked away. He had always looked away. Her mother stepped closer, not with comfort, but with a quiet warning in her voice. You have 15 minutes to be ready, she said softly, like a blade wrapped in silk. Don't make me come back. Then she left, leaving the scent of perfume and power behind her. Malcolm lingered just long enough to rest a hand on Ilara's shoulder. Someday you'll understand this was necessary. But his touch felt like ash, his words like dust. And then the door closed again. Alone once more, Ilara looked at the dress. Her heart didn't swell, it shrank. This wasn't the start of a life, it was the end of her freedom. Celine Bennett didn't need to raise her voice, her presence alone was a warning. She stepped closer to Ilara, her gaze like ice, her words low and sharp enough to wound. You have 15 minutes, she murmured. Be ready. Don't make me return. She turned without waiting for a response, the door clicking shut behind her with unnerving finality. In her absence, the room felt heavier, as if the air itself had decided to mourn. Malcolm lingered for a moment, clearly uncomfortable in his own skin. He ran a tired hand through his graying hair, then turned to his daughter, his voice a hollow echo of a man who had long since given up. I know this isn't easy, Ilara, he said gently, though he didn't quite meet her eyes. But one day, maybe you'll understand. We had no other choice. He rested his hand briefly on her shoulder, a gesture meant to console, but to Alara, it only underlined how truly alone she was. Then he left, too, closing the door as quietly as he had lived. Alara didn't move for a long time. Her gaze stayed fixed on the dress, its white fabric catching the dim light like a cruel joke. No matter how many times she blinked, it didn't transform into something hopeful. It was still a symbol of everything she was being forced to give up. Finally, with trembling hands, she stood. Her fingers fumbled with the delicate layers as she dressed herself in silence. When she looked in the mirror, the woman staring back at her felt like a stranger, fragile, painted in sorrow, and wearing a future that didn't belong to her. The wedding didn't take place in a chapel filled with flowers. It happened in a stark hospital room, sterile and cold, beneath the harsh glare of fluorescent lights. No music, no warmth, only the hum of machines and the sound of controlled breathing. Lying unconscious in the bed was Callum Thorne, heir to the Thorne family fortune. Months ago, an accident had left him in a coma, his face splashed across news headlines, and now that sleeping man, wrapped in wires and silence, was being named Alara's husband. She stepped into the room with a bouquet of white lilies clutched in shaky fingers. A judge stood at the foot of the bed, reading the vows with the tone of someone announcing a legal sentence. Alara barely registered the words. Everything sounded distant, like echoes from another world. When her turn came to speak, she hesitated. Her mother's words played again in her mind. "You've always been the practical one." She forced the word out, yes, though it tasted like ash. It was a yes not to love, but to survival. A yes to a life built on lies and desperation. Once the ceremony ended, she turned on her heel and walked out without a backward glance. In the hallway, Celine was waiting with her arms crossed and her usual expression of chilly triumph. "Well done," she said with a thin smile. "You've done your part." Alara didn't reply. She kept walking, each step feeling heavier than the last. She wanted to disappear, to rip off the dress and vanish into a place where no one knew her name. But then her mother's voice sliced through the silence like a blade. "Alara." She stopped, the hairs on her neck rising. Celine was walking toward her, something dangerous in her eyes. She grabbed Alara's arm, holding her in place. Her voice was quiet, but thick with threat. "Don't even think about running. If you do, I'll reveal everything. All of it." Alara froze. Her blood went cold. "What are you talking about?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The look in her mother's eyes made her stomach twist, dark, determined, and haunted. From down the hallway, Malcolm's voice called out, hurried and uneasy. "This has gone too far." He rushed over, trying to wedge himself between them. "Celine, please, don't do this now. Stay out of it," Celine snapped. Without looking away from her daughter. "Not here," Malcolm insisted, his hand gently pulling at his wife's arm. "Not like this." For a long moment, no one moved. Then Celine abruptly let go of Alara's arm, turning her back on both of them, saying nothing more. Alara stood frozen, her pulse pounding in her ears. She felt like a marionette held upright by invisible strings she'd never been allowed to cut. She didn't know what the truth was that her mother had threatened to expose. She didn't know what her father was so desperate to keep buried. But deep in her bones, Alara sensed one thing with clarity. Whatever secret her mother was keeping, it had the power to ruin everything, and it might already have started to. Alara stood frozen in the hallway, her body still reeling from the force of her mother's grip. Her arm throbbed, but it was the echo of her mother's words that truly pierced her. "I'll expose the truth." But what truth? She stared at her parents, Celine standing like a stone fortress, unflinching. Malcolm avoiding her eyes, his guilt wrapped in silence. Something about the way he looked at her, as if he pitied her, as if he already knew the devastation behind whatever secret Celine was holding onto so tightly. Alara tried to steady her breath, but her chest was tight with unease. There was something deeper here, something that had been buried for years beneath obedience and silence. And now, it was clawing its way to the surface. Celine's face was unreadable, yet beneath that polished mask, Alara could see it rage. Not the kind that explodes, but the kind that simmers, that builds, that waits. This wasn't a moment of anger. It was a reckoning years in the making. Alara took a step back, instinct begging her to leave, to run far from whatever darkness had just been hinted at. But something in her mother's tone, something in her father's fear, rooted her to the ground. She had to stay. She had to hear it. The silence around them became a presence, thick and watchful. Celine folded her arms tightly, her jaw clenched, and turned to Malcolm, who looked like he was trying to disarm a ticking bomb. "That's enough, Celine," Malcolm said, voice low but firm. "This isn't the time." Her eyes flared with frustration. "If she keeps acting like a child, I won't have a choice." Alara barely dared to breathe. Her mother's words struck like a match to dry kindling. Something was coming. Malcolm stepped closer, his voice quieter now, almost pleading. "Please, not here." Alara strained to listen, catching only pieces of their exchange, but each word felt like a shard of glass. "I've had enough, Malcolm. How long do you expect me to—" "Don't," he whispered, cutting her off. "Not now. You promised." That word promised sent a chill down Alara's spine. How many times had she witnessed this strange choreography between her parents? Her mother trying to speak, her father stopping her. How many times had the truth come to the edge of her lips only to be swallowed? Memories flooded her. She was 12, playing alone in the garden, when her mother approached her with a strange intensity in her eyes. "Alara, there's something I need to tell you." But before the sentence could finish, Malcolm's voice had floated from the kitchen, calling for Celine. She had stiffened instantly, retreating into her usual poise. Nothing was ever mentioned again. Then again, when she was 17, after a family dinner, thick with tension, Alara had been curled on her bed with a book when Celine entered, hesitant, eyes softer than usual. "Alara, your life isn't what—" And then, like a ghost in the doorway, Malcolm appeared. "Can we talk?" he had asked, calm but firm, and just like that, whatever her mother was about to say vanished again. Now standing in the stark corridor of a hospital that had become a stage for betrayal, Alara was once again in the middle of the same scene, only this time, she wasn't a child anymore. She kept still, forcing herself to remain silent so she could catch every word. "She has a right to know," Celine whispered, her voice crackling like a held-in storm. "You can't hide it from her forever." Alara's heart pounded so loud it nearly drowned out the rest. What was it that she had a right to know? What truth had been haunting the corners of her life all these years? And why did it feel like learning it might tear her whole world apart? Inside her, a storm was building. "Celine, we've been through this," Malcolm said through clenched teeth, clearly struggling to contain the growing tension. "Not here." "And when, Malcolm?" Celine snapped back, her voice coated with bitter irony. "At her funeral? When it's too late to matter?" Malcolm flinched at her words, the weight of them hitting a place he didn't want to admit existed. He looked at the floor, searching for something to hold on to, but found nothing. Alara's fingers curled into her sides, trying to ground herself as the walls around her began to tilt. It was too much unsaid, too much darkness. Her voice, though trembling, sliced through the silence. "What are you talking about?" Both her parents froze. For a moment, neither of them looked like themselves. They turned toward her slowly, as if they'd just seen her, for the first time not as a daughter, but as someone who could finally demand answers. Celine was the first to recover. "It's nothing you need to concern yourself with," she said, her tone crisp and emotionless, the same tone she always used when she wanted to shut the door on any argument. "Don't lie to me." Ilara stepped forward, her voice rising not in volume, but in pain. Her eyes shimmered, not just with tears, but with years of repressed ache. "You said I needed to know something. What truth is it that you've both been hiding from me?" Celine's lips parted, but before she could speak, Malcolm raised his hand, not forcefully, but firmly. "Ilara, not now, please." His gaze begged her to wait, to be patient, to keep pretending just a little longer. "Trust me," he said. But the words rang hollow, empty sounds from a man who had stood on the sidelines of her life for far too long. Trust? How could she trust them after being cast aside, pushed into silence, forced into a marriage with a stranger? Her voice cracked as the truth poured out. "After everything, after handing me over like a deal you couldn't refuse, you expect me to trust you?" Malcolm looked like he wanted to respond, but as always, Celine cut in before he could. "You've done what was needed," she said sharply. "Now go home and pack." Ilara blinked, startled. "What? You heard me," Celine replied with that same imperious calm. "Callum will be moved into his family estate this evening. The master suite is being prepared. You need to be there, as his wife." It hit Ilara like a blow to the chest. So that was it. Her life had been signed away and sealed, and now she was being delivered like an accessory to someone else's future. "Home," she repeated, a hollow laugh escaping her lips. "Is that what you call it?" She looked between them, Celine unmoved, Malcolm silently retreating into himself. "I've done everything," she said, voice trembling with quiet rage. "I married a man who doesn't even know me. I followed your plan. And now you want me to pretend this is real." "It is real," Celine snapped. "This is your life now. Accept it and move forward." Ilara felt the lump rising in her throat, but she refused to let the tears fall. Not in front of her mother, not today. She turned, walking away, desperate to escape this moment, this family, this unbearable weight. But then her mother called out again, "Ilara." She stopped, every part of her going still. There was something in Celine's tone, this time low, almost dangerous. Slowly she turned back. "No matter what happens," Celine said, her voice like the hush before a storm, "remember this. Everything I've done was to protect this family." The words hung in the air like a veiled threat. Her eyes were unreadable, her face carved from stone. Ilara didn't reply. She turned away once more, her legs unsteady, her pulse roaring in her ears. But one thing was clear, whatever secret her mother was hiding, it had cost them more than anyone dared to admit. And now, Ilara wasn't sure whether discovering it would free her or destroy her completely. Behind her, Ilara caught her mother's voice low, almost a whisper, but sharp enough to wound. "She'll learn to live with it," Celine murmured to Malcolm. Ilara quickened her pace. She didn't want to hear another word. In truth, she wished she could erase her mother's voice from her memory altogether. But no matter how fast her feet carried her, the feeling lingered like smoke after a fire. A sense that this was only the beginning, that something deeper, darker, was lurking just beneath the surface. Whatever secret her mother was keeping, Ilara felt it might be her undoing. But for now, what terrified her more was the life waiting for her, the life of a stranger's wife. She stepped into the Bennett estate, the place she had called home since she was a child, and for the first time, it felt completely foreign. Her legs trembled beneath her, as she closed the door behind her. The click of the lock was a final note, sealing away whatever innocence she still had left. The tears she had been holding back spilled freely now, tracing hot paths down her cheeks. She looked around, but the grand hallway, with its polished floors and towering portraits, didn't offer her comfort. Everything inside this house had been chosen by her mother, every painting, every vase, every perfectly arranged piece of furniture. Nothing here ever reflected Alara. It had always been a home built for appearances, not for love. She climbed the stairs slowly, the weight of the past few hours pressing on her chest like a boulder. Her vision blurred. Each step felt heavier than the last. When she reached her bedroom, she closed the door behind her and leaned against it, as if it might keep the rest of the world out. Then she sank to the floor, her arms wrapped tightly around her knees. And there, in the quiet dim of the room, she let herself fall apart. Not just for the wedding, not just for the man waiting for her in silence and machines, but for all the years she had learned to survive by shrinking herself. The room around her, small, faded, untouched by time, tightened like a noose. The dark wooden bed creaked with every shift. The curtains still hung, limp and lifeless, the same ones from her teenage years. Nothing had changed, and that was the problem. This room had always been a reflection of who she was, in the Bennett family, the afterthought. She closed her eyes, willing the pain to fade, but instead, memories rushed in like a flood. She was 8 again, sitting cross-legged on the floor of her sister's room, watching Mira unwrap a new doll, a beautiful one, with golden curls and a dress of soft blue satin. With timid hands, Alara had asked to hold it. "Don't touch her," Mira had snapped, pulling the doll away. Alara looked up at her mother, waiting, hoping for fairness, for defense, but Celine only smiled indulgently at her favorite daughter. "Alara, you have your own things. Let your sister enjoy hers." But Alara didn't. Her dolls were second-hand, some missing limbs, dressed in clothes she'd stitched together from scraps. That was the first time she understood in this house. So, nothing would ever truly belong to her. Later, as teenagers, Mira was escorted to charity galas and glittering events, always standing beside their mother like the crown jewel of the family. Alara stayed home. She was told to be helpful, to be practical. "Let Mira shine," her mother had said once. "We all play our part." And Alara, hers was always in the shadows. "You need to be useful, Alara. Help with the house, focus on your studies, be practical." Not like Mira with her head in the clouds. Her mother's words had been like footsteps in her mind, repetitive, echoing, inescapable. They had shaped her more than affection ever had. Over the years, those reminders carved away Alara's dreams, replacing them with responsibilities. Slowly, she became someone who never dared to want more. Because wanting, in this house, was dangerous. She remembered a night that had stayed with her like a scar. Mira had just come home from a charity gala, radiant in a gown that shimmered like stardust. Their mother had accompanied her, both of them glowing as if they'd stepped out of a magazine. Meanwhile, Alara sat on the living room floor, folding linens. Not because she wanted to, but because Celine had handed her the basket without a second thought. "You should try dressing more like Mira," Celine had said, her tone crisp as she gave Alara a long, appraising look. "Might help you get noticed." The words didn't cut, they crushed. But Alara, as always, said nothing. She simply lowered her head and kept folding. Mira smiled softly, basking in the unspoken praise, while Alara silently absorbed what was left. Now, sitting on the floor of her room, Alara felt the weight of those memories settle like stones on her chest. They returned one by one, sharp and unwelcome, her mother's disapproval, the constant comparisons, the years of invisibility. Her suitcase sat half open in the corner. It wasn't hard to pack. There was so little that was truly hers. Almost everything in the room had been handed down furniture Mira had outgrown, trinkets Celine had chosen without asking. The only thing Ilara owned outright were her memories, and even those were frayed at the edges. She stood, her limbs heavy, her eyes swollen from crying. Slowly, she moved toward the suitcase and began placing clothes inside with mechanical precision. Every folded blouse, every faded scarf reminded her of how small she'd always been made to feel. Then came the sound of heels clicking down the hallway. Her heart skipped. The door opened abruptly. Celine stood there, flawless as always, her posture like armor. "Are you ready?" she asked, voice flat and impersonal like a boss addressing a staff member. Not a mother, speaking to her daughter. Ilara glanced up, quickly wiping at her eyes. Almost. Celine's eyes scanned the room as if inspecting her progress. "Good. I want you standing beside Callum when he arrives. You'll be his wife in the public eye. Be presentable." Anger flickered inside Ilara, rising like a tide, but she swallowed it down. She wouldn't give her mother the satisfaction of seeing her crack. She simply nodded and turned back to her suitcase. Celine watched for a few more seconds, then turned on her heel. "Don't take too long," she said as she left, her words trailing behind her like perfume. "I don't tolerate lateness." The door closed. Ilara paused, her hands still. The room felt smaller than ever, the walls drawing in. She looked at the suitcase. It wasn't just clothes in there. It was the final fragments of the life she'd known. And after this day, even those would be gone. When she finally stepped outside, the car was already waiting. The ride was painfully quiet. Ilara sat in the back seat, her eyes trained on the window, watching the landscape blur past. But her mind wasn't on the trees or the road. It was stuck in the whirlwind of the day. Her wedding, her family, the silence. Sitting in the front, Celine seemed almost cheerful. Her posture was relaxed, her smile subtle but constant. "Well, Ilara," she finally said, adjusting the pearl necklace at her collar, "I suppose you really did get lucky after all." Ilara didn't answer, but her stomach twisted. Her mother wasn't thinking about love, or sacrifice, or the sheer weight of what had just happened. She was thinking about status, about power, about wealth. And Ilara was just another transaction. Celine adjusted the strand of pearls around her neck with a satisfied little sigh, as if she were already basking in the glow of her daughter's new life. "You do realize this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, don't you?" she said, her tone light but layered with meaning. "Callum comes from one of the wealthiest families in the country. Without this arrangement, you would never have landed such a match." Ilara's chest tightened. Her mother's words weren't just cold, they were cruel, a blunt reminder of how little she was believed in. But Celine didn't stop. Richard Thorne was more than generous to accept the deal. His son needed someone by his side, and we needed a lifeline. It worked out perfectly. "You mean, as you always dreamed," Ilara murmured, her voice low and laced with irony. Celine smiled faintly, undeterred. "Exactly. A life of comfort, security, respect. That's priceless, Ilara. Richard is paying more than handsomely for your role in this." In the driver's seat, Malcolm remained silent, his eyes locked on the road. He never interrupted. But Ilara noticed how tightly his hands gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles pale with tension. Outside the window, the world rolled past unnoticed. Ilara's gaze was fixed, but her thoughts spiraled inward. What her mother viewed as triumph, she saw as a quiet kind of imprisonment, a cage made of silk and gold. When the car finally pulled up to the gates of the Thorne estate, Ilara couldn't stop the small gasp that escaped her lips. The grounds stretched endlessly, framed by wrought iron gates and a stone path that led to a grand white mansion with towering columns and gleaming windows. Manicured gardens unfolded in every direction, and in the center stood a fountain adorned with marble figures, their faces frozen in delicate expressions. Celine let out a low whistle. My goodness, Alara, you really did luck out. Can you believe this? I never imagined a Bennett would live in a place like this. Alara didn't respond. The comment didn't shock her, it just deepened the ache in her chest. Her mother wasn't marveling for her sake. She was marveling for herself, for status, for image. Two staff members appeared as the car stopped, stepping forward with practiced politeness to assist them. Celine stepped out first, eyes sweeping over the estate like she wanted to memorize every detail. Alara followed, the cold air stinging her cheeks. Then came Richard Thorne. He stood tall on the front steps, his presence commanding without effort. His gaze was measured, shrewd, distant. He didn't smile. The ambulance will be here shortly, he said. I trust your daughter is prepared to fulfill her responsibilities. Celine nodded, all charm and polish. Alara is more than ready. She'll be exactly what Callum needs. The words made Alara shiver, but she kept her silence. After a few short, stiff pleasantries, Celine turned to her daughter. She reached out, smoothing Alara's shoulders, as if to show affection, but the gesture felt hollow, rehearsed. Be strong, she said quietly. You're doing the right thing. And just like that, she was gone. Malcolm gave Alara one last look, something between sorrow and surrender, then got into the car beside Celine. The engine roared softly to life, and within moments they disappeared behind the estate gates. Alara stood motionless at the entrance, the world quiet again. The loneliness hit her with full force. Then the ambulance arrived. She followed the stretcher in silence as Callum was wheeled into the house, the wheels clicking softly against the marble floor. The corridors they passed looked like something out of a film, oil paintings, gold-rimmed mirrors, elegant sconces glowing against velvet walls. When they reached his room, Alara stayed back as doctors and nurses moved around efficiently, adjusting monitors and IV lines. And there he was, Callum Thorne. The man she had just married, though he had never once spoken her name. He lay there, motionless, suspended in sleep beneath the glow of machines. His face was striking one she'd seen in magazines, news articles, social pages, once vibrant, now pale, quiet, unreachable. Alara stepped closer. For a moment, all her anger and confusion softened. He didn't look powerful anymore. He didn't look like a stranger she had been traded for. He looked lost. And for the first time since this nightmare began, Alara felt a glimmer of something she hadn't expected: compassion. She had seen him before on TV screens, magazine covers, society pages. Callum Thorne, the golden heir, the man with the perfect smile and limitless future, always surrounded by glittering lights and powerful people. But now, lying there, surrounded by machines and silence, he looked nothing like the man the world had adored. He looked breakable. And something in Alara's heart cracked, not with romance or affection, but with recognition. In his stillness, in his isolation, he felt like a reflection of her own life. Two strangers, both trapped in lives they didn't choose. When the doctors finished adjusting the wires and monitors, they slipped out quietly, leaving Alara alone in the room. The silence wrapped itself around her, heavy and constant, broken only by the soft beeping of machines. She pulled a chair close to the bed, her fingers trembling slightly as she bowed down. For a long moment, she simply watched him. His face elegant, pale, unmoving, seemed like it belonged to another world. She let out a slow, uneven breath. Hi. Callum? She said, voice barely louder than a whisper. I'm your wife. We got married today. She paused, her throat tightening around the words. I don't know what this is supposed to be. I don't even know if you can hear me. But I hope I can take care of you, at least here." Her voice wavered. "I imagine your life was full of things I've never known, and mine." She exhaled, forcing a small, bitter smile. "Mine was full of things no one should have to endure." Tears stung her eyes again, but this time she didn't fight them. "I never really felt loved, not properly, not at home. So maybe, just maybe, this room, this moment, is still better than where I came from." She leaned her head gently on the arm of the chair, the day finally collapsing onto her shoulders. Within minutes, she drifted into sleep, her breathing soft and steady beside his. A warm lamp lit the space with a quiet glow, casting golden light over both of them, two souls who had lost control of their own stories. The next morning, Ilara stirred at the sound of a door opening. She blinked, disoriented for a moment, then remembered everything: the mansion, the marriage, the man in the bed, and then she saw the woman, poised, elegant, dressed in a beige silk suit, with her hair pulled back into a flawless bun. Her presence alone could silence a room. So this was Clarissa Thorne, Callum's mother. Her eyes swept over Ilara with an expression that was hard to read somewhere between scrutiny and sadness. "So, you're the one," Clarissa said. "My son's wife." Ilara rose to her feet quickly, still drowsy, her voice small. "Good morning, ma'am." Clarissa stepped further into the room, taking in every detail. But instead of the sharpness Ilara expected, there was something gentler in her gaze. "Please call me Clarissa," she said, walking over to her son's bedside. Her hand brushed the blanket tenderly, eyes softening as she looked down at Callum. "Did you stay with him all night?" Ilara nodded. I felt comfortable here." Clarissa turned her head slightly, studying her again this time, with something closer to warmth. "I'm glad. He needs someone beside him," she said quietly. "It's hard seeing him like this. But I still believe, with everything in me, that he'll wake up." There was something unwavering in Clarissa's voice. Not blind hope, but something stronger. A mother's quiet defiance against loss. "I'll do my best," Ilara said, her voice low but honest. Clarissa gave a faint smile. "I know you will. I can see it in your eyes. You're kind, and kind is exactly what he needs." She paused, then added, "Richard may see numbers, but I trust instincts. And mine say, you're going to be important to his healing." A lump rose in Ilara's throat. She wasn't used to being seen, not like this, not as someone capable of offering comfort, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she didn't feel so completely alone. There was something about Clarissa's presence that Ilara hadn't expected: gentleness, warmth, a quiet strength. In her, Ilara found a kind of comfort she didn't realize she had been missing all her life. A mother figure who didn't demand or criticize, but simply saw her. Over the next few weeks, their connection deepened. At first, Clarissa had been formal, her manners polished and reserved, as though still unsure of this unexpected daughter-in-law. But slowly, something shifted. Over cups of tea in the sunlit drawing room, they spoke about Callum, about the mansion, even about Clarissa's own dreams she had once placed on hold for her family. Ilara listened, shared, and for once didn't feel the need to guard herself. Clarissa was full of quiet praise, never dramatic, never excessive, but always sincere. "He's lucky to have you," Clarissa told her one afternoon as they sat together in the conservatory, the soft clink of teacups between them. "I just hope I'm doing enough," Ilara replied softly, lowering her eyes. Clarissa shook her head with a gentle smile. "You're already doing more than most would, Ilara. Much more." Those words settled in Alara's heart like warmth seeping into a cold room. She hadn't heard such kindness in years, if ever. Still, as the days passed, a restlessness began to stir in her. Caring for Callum gave her purpose, but waiting, always waiting for something to change, felt like being caught in a slow-moving tide. She needed more, something that was just hers. One morning, while wandering the east wing of the mansion, Ilara discovered a vast library. The shelves stretched to the ceiling, filled with titles she had never seen before. Dusty leather-bound volumes, first editions, even books on finance and investment subjects that, oddly, caught her curiosity. She started reading casually, but soon she was fully immersed. Ilara had always loved learning, even back in the Bennett household, where no one encouraged it. Books had been her quiet rebellion. Now they became her anchor. Mornings turned into study sessions. She filled a notebook with notes, ideas, and theories about markets, budgeting, long-term growth. In the afternoons, she returned to Callum's side, reading aloud or helping Clarissa with the daily affairs of the estate. Days became weeks, weeks became months, and something began to shift inside her. Not joy, exactly, but something like peace. It was fragile, new, unfamiliar, but it was hers. One afternoon, as she sat cross-legged in the library, surrounded by open books and half-filled pages, she heard Clarissa calling from the living room. "Ilara, someone's here to see you." Ilara frowned, surprised. She wasn't expecting anyone. When she descended the grand staircase, her breath caught. Standing near the doorway, polished and poised as ever, was Celine. Her mother. "Ilara, darling," Celine greeted, stepping forward with a smooth smile. "How lovely you look." "This house suits you." Ilara didn't return the smile. She folded her arms across her chest. "You've never visited before," she said flatly. "What do you want?" Celine paused for a moment, as if trying to soften her approach, but the tightness in her jaw gave her away. "I need your help," she said plainly. Ilara arched a brow. "Help? The situation back home." "It's not good," Celine admitted, choosing her words with careful restraint. "I thought maybe, given your new position, you might speak to the Thorns, convince them to lend us something." Ilara stared at her, stunned. "Alone?" she asked slowly, her voice sharpening. "Or something simpler," Celine replied with forced lightness. "A car, a smaller property, something we could quietly sell to settle a few things." Ilara's stomach churned. It wasn't just the request, it was the way her mother said it. As if it were normal. As if asking her daughter to exploit her marriage was just a practical solution. "Are you serious?" Ilara asked, her voice trembling, not with fear, but with disbelief. "Of course I'm serious, Ilara," Celine said, her voice edged with irritation, as though the absurdity of the request didn't even occur to her. "You know how things are. It's not like it would hurt them." Before Ilara could respond, Clarissa stepped into the room. Her presence was calm but commanding, her expression curious as her eyes flicked between the two women. "Ilara, is everything all right?" she asked, gently, sensing the tension that lingered in the air, like static. Ilara inhaled slowly, willing herself not to explode. Her heart was racing. "Yes," she said, voice tight. "Everything's fine." She turned to her mother, standing tall despite the tremble in her hands. "Mom," she said quietly, but with growing resolve, "I think you should leave." Celine's eyes widened, caught off guard. "What? You heard me," Ilara replied, stronger this time. "I'm not going to ask the Thorne family for anything, and I certainly won't help you take from them to cover your mess." Celine stepped forward, her eyes flashing. "Don't be ungrateful. Everything I've done, everything was for you. For this family." Ilara's voice cracked, not with weakness, but with the sharp edge of truth. "No, you did it for yourself." This isn't about family. This has never been about me. For a moment, Celine stood still, her pride momentarily stunned into silence. But then she straightened her shoulders, reclaiming her icy composure. She cast one last glance at Alara, an unspoken warning. "You'll regret this," she said softly, before turning and walking out the door. Alara didn't move, not until she felt a gentle hand rest on her shoulder. "Clarissa." Her voice was calm. "Are you okay?" Alara nodded, though her chest felt impossibly tight. "I just need a moment." Clarissa gave her a small, understanding smile, then quietly stepped away, leaving Alara in the silence. As soon as she was alone, the weight of it all collapsed on her shoulders. It wasn't just the disappointment. It wasn't just another wound from the same woman who had hurt her in 100 subtle ways. It was the realization that for the first time in her life she had said no. And maybe, just maybe, that meant she was beginning to become someone new. Alara stayed in the room a few minutes longer, trying to collect herself. Her mind was tangled, her body exhausted, but deep down, something had shifted. She had faced her mother and chosen herself. When Clarissa returned, Alara stood quickly, a hint of embarrassment rising to her cheeks. "I'm sorry," she said hurriedly. "About that?" "About her." "My mother." Clarissa gently raised a hand, stopping her. "There's no need to apologize," she said with warmth. "I saw enough to understand." They sat down together, and for a moment, Alara just breathed. Clarissa waited, never rushing, never pressuring. Alara's voice came, quiet and uncertain. "She's always been like that," she began, fingers fidgeting in her lap. "My mother never really loved me, not in the way a mother should." Clarissa tilted her head, gently encouraging her to go on. "It was always about Mira," Alara continued with a bitter smile. "She was the star, the favorite. I was the responsible one, the practical one, the one who didn't ask for anything and did what I was told." Clarissa's voice was soft. "And she never saw that?" Alara shook her head, blinking back the welling tears. "No. In fact, she made it clear that I should be grateful for whatever crumbs I got." She laughed a hollow, humorless sound. "My whole life I've existed for everyone else. I never thought I was allowed to want more." Clarissa reached out, placing a hand gently over Alara's. "I'm sorry you had to grow up like that," she said sincerely. "No mother should ever make her daughter feel like she's not enough." The simple truth in those words made Alara's eyes fill once more. She looked at Clarissa, this woman who was still a stranger, in many ways, but who had already offered more care than the one who raised her. "Thank you," Alara whispered, gently squeezing her hand. Clarissa grew quiet, thoughtful. Then she spoke, her tone shifting to something more serious. "There's something I want to talk to you about." Alara looked up, surprised. Clarissa's expression had changed. Still kind, but now layered with purpose. There was something comforting in Clarissa's presence, a quiet warmth that Alara had slowly come to trust. "What is it?" Alara asked, sensing the weight behind Clarissa's hesitation. Clarissa took a breath, her fingers gently interlacing in her lap. "I've spent so long in this house, caring for Callum, hoping, and I still believe truly that one day he'll open his eyes." Her voice trembled, thick with emotion. But then she looked around the grand, silent room and added softly, "Still, something is missing here. This house, it doesn't feel alive anymore." Alara frowned, unsure of where Clarissa was going. "I always dreamed of a big family," Clarissa continued, her eyes glistening. "Grandchildren." Laughter, the sound of tiny footsteps echoing down these halls. And then it clicked. Alara's stomach tightened. "You're saying you want to bring life back into this house?" she said slowly, trying to keep her voice steady. Clarissa gave a gentle smile. "I know it's unusual, but Callum and Richard had discussed this before, as a precaution. and Callum, ever the planner, left samples stored safely, just in case. Alara's heart thudded in her chest. The idea was surreal, unthinkable. But Clarissa spoke on before she could object. I'm not pressuring you, Alara, I promise. But I believe this could be healing, for all of us, for you, for Callum, for the family. Alara couldn't answer, not yet. Her thoughts were a blur. That's a lot to process, she whispered. Clarissa reached over, touching her arm with genuine tenderness. I understand. You don't have to decide now. That night, Alara lay in bed, wide-eyed, listening to the hum of the mansion around her. The idea of having a child especially like this had never once crossed her mind. It felt foreign, immense, but so was everything she'd known before. What if, in this strange and unpredictable moment, there was a chance to create something that was truly her own? Not something arranged, not something expected, something real. The next morning, Clarissa brought it up again, this time over breakfast. Richard was there, too stoic, reserved as always. No one will force your hand, Richard said plainly, folding his hands on the table. But this could be meaningful. Meaningful? Alara asked, her voice still hesitant. Yes, he replied, meeting her gaze. Callum is the future of this family. But this could be a way to bring hope back. A son, he could be that hope. Alara glanced at Clarissa, who was watching her closely, a flicker of hope and fear in her eyes. I need time, Alara said, honest and unafraid. Clarissa and Richard nodded, saying nothing more. They understood, and over the next few days, Alara sat with the idea, turned it over in her heart. The circumstances were anything but normal, but the decision, it would be hers. For once, fully hers. When she finally approached Clarissa in the living room, her decision was made. I'm ready, Alara said softly. Let's set the appointment. Clarissa exhaled, her smile breaking through the tension in her eyes. You won't regret this. I know it. The following week, Alara, Clarissa, and Richard sat across from a specialist at a private clinic. The doctor spoke calmly, explaining the process, what it would involve, what the possibilities were. Alara listened carefully, notebook in hand, but her heartbeat was loud in her ears. As they left the clinic, Clarissa looked at her, concerned. Are you sure about this? Alara paused, then turned to the woman who had become more of a mother to her than her own ever was. I am, she said. She didn't know what the future would look like, but for the first time, she wasn't following someone else's script. She was writing her own. In the days leading up to the procedure, the atmosphere in the Thorne mansion shifted. Clarissa and Richard were visibly nervous, though they tried to mask it with calm reassurances. Alara, meanwhile, moved between quiet reflection and a cautious sense of anticipation. There was uncertainty, but also possibility. And for Alara, that was enough. Alara sat in silence, her hands resting gently in her lap, caught between anticipation and fear. Despite all the uncertainty, she had made her decision, and for the first time, it wasn't to please someone else. It wasn't out of obligation or desperation. It was hers. On the appointed day, she, Clarissa, and Richard returned to the clinic together. The atmosphere in the car was filled with nervous glances, hopeful smiles, and a kind of quiet reverence, like they were approaching something sacred. The procedure was successful. The doctor explained everything with calm professionalism, but Alara could feel her pulse pounding in her ears. Now, he said, we wait a few weeks to confirm the results. As they left the clinic, Richard tried to sound reassuring. All we can do now is hope. But even in his voice, Alara could detect the tension. Clarissa reached over and gently squeezed her hand. It's going to be all right, she said, with a confidence that made Alara want to believe it. I can feel it. Weeks passed slowly. Each day stretched longer than the last. And then came the second visit. Alara sat in the examination room, her hands cold despite the warmth of the sun filtering through the windows. Clarissa and Richard were beside her, waiting in silence. When the doctor entered, he wore a knowing smile. "I have good news," he said, looking straight at Alara. "The insemination was successful. You're pregnant." Alara's breath caught. Her eyes welled instantly. "Pregnant," she whispered, barely believing the word. "And there's more," the doctor added, his tone light with amazement. "You're not expecting one child, you're expecting 3. The room went still. Then Clarissa let out a cry, pure, unfiltered joy. She wrapped Alara in her arms, her laughter and tears spilling together. "Triplets," she whispered in awe. "Oh, Alara, you have no idea what this means. What happiness this will bring to our home." Even Richard, usually composed to the point of stone, allowed himself a rare, genuine smile. He reached out and clasped Alara's hand firmly. "We're proud of you," he said quietly. "Truly." Still stunned, Alara placed a hand over her belly. So much emotion surged through her: fear, hope, disbelief, wonder. For the first time in so long, she didn't feel like a background character in someone else's life. She was becoming the center of something new, something that was finally hers. The following months brought profound change. Clarissa rarely left her side, ensuring every detail from nutrition to rest was taken care of. Richard, while more reserved, was always present in his own way, offering comfort through quiet gestures, thoughtful arrangements, and unwavering support. But most of all, Alara found peace in the quiet moments she shared with Callum. Each day she sat beside him in his room, gently holding his hand as she told him everything. "Callum," she whispered one evening, her fingers brushing his, "you're going to be a father." Her voice trembled with emotion. 3 children. Can you imagine that? A tear rolled down her cheek. "I don't know what it'll be like, but I promise I'll do everything I can to raise them with love. And I'll be here for them, for you." She didn't know if he could hear her, but it didn't matter. Those conversations became sacred, her way of weaving him into this new chapter, even as he lay silent. Meanwhile, across town, Celine couldn't stop thinking about her last visit to the Thorne mansion. Alara's defiance had humiliated her, and worse, it had made her feel irrelevant. She tried to dismiss it, tried to paint her daughter's choices as foolish or naive. But the bitterness wouldn't fade. Malcolm, however, had grown quiet in a different way. When he heard, through a passing conversation, that Alara was pregnant, he stopped, and something inside him softened. He didn't feel anger, not even resentment, just a deep, unexpected joy. For once, he didn't ask Celine's permission. He went to visit. Clarissa met him at the door, her posture polite but firm. "Alara needs rest," she said kindly but clearly. "She's not receiving visitors today." Malcolm nodded, accepting it without resistance. Still, before he left, he looked her in the eye and said, "Please let her know. I'm proud of her, and I'd like to see her again when she's ready." Clarissa gave a small, understanding nod. And so the days continued to pass, gently, until one night the silence of the mansion was broken. It was time. Alara went into labor under a sky full of stars, and the halls of the Thorne estate, once heavy with quiet and grief, were suddenly alive with movement, voices, and anticipation. The house, at last, was about to welcome life. The night was a blur of motion and breathless urgency. Richard drove with determination, while Clarissa sat in the back seat, her hand wrapped around Alara's, whispering words of comfort through clenched teeth and calm eyes. "You're strong, Alara. Everything will be okay." And hours later, it was. 3 tiny cries echoed through the sterile hospital air. 2 boys, 1 girl, all perfect. Tears streamed down Alara's face as she held them one by one, their warmth sinking into her chest like a promise. In their tiny fingers, she felt something she had never truly known before, a love that was hers. Clarissa and Richard stood nearby, overwhelmed with joy. The family that had once lived in silence and grief now overflowed with new life, laughter, and tiny footsteps just beginning their journey. Back at the mansion, the halls that had once held only memories now echoed with the sounds of bottles, lullabies, and soft baby laughter. Exhausted but whole, Alara poured herself into motherhood. And though the days were long and the nights sometimes endless, she never felt alone again. One quiet afternoon, 3 months later, she sat in Callum's room. One of the babies rested against her chest, the others sleeping peacefully nearby. As she always did, Alara spoke softly to the man who had never yet answered. "They're growing so fast," she whispered, brushing her hand over her son's hair. "I wish you could see them. I wish you knew them." But then, something changed. A faint shift in the rhythm of the machine, a flicker at the corner of her eye. Alora's breath caught. "Callum," she whispered, her heart pounding. His fingers twitched. She froze. And then slowly, miraculously, he opened his eyes. A few blinks, a struggle to focus. "What?" His voice cracked, raspy, and weak. Alara's tears came instantly, falling freely down her cheeks. He looked around the room in confusion, his gaze stopping at her, then the baby in her arms. "Who are you?" Alara's lips trembled. "I'm Alara," she said softly. "Your wife." He blinked again, trying to understand. "My wife?" She nodded, holding his gaze with trembling hope. These past months, everything changed. Before she could explain more, the door opened. Clarissa and Richard stepped in and stopped cold. Clarissa's hands flew to her mouth, her eyes filled with tears. "Callum." She rushed to his side, taking his hand as if afraid he might vanish again. "What happened to me?" he asked, panic creeping into his voice. Clarissa looked at Alara, then back at her son. Her voice was steady, but full of emotion. "You've been in a coma for over a year." He looked back to Alara, to the baby now stirring in her arms. "And now?" he asked, voice trembling. "What happens now?" Alara stood quietly, rocking the baby gently. "We take it one day at a time," she whispered. And in that moment, the room fell silent, not with fear, but with wonder. Because healing had already begun, not with answers, but with presence, not with perfection, but with love. Sometimes life doesn't unfold the way we expect, but even in the strangest chapters, there's a chance to write something beautiful. Ilara's story reminds us that healing isn't loud, it's quiet, patient, and begins the moment we choose to stay, to love, and to begin again. Thank you for walking with us through Ilara's journey, a story of quiet courage, of breaking free from the weight of expectations, and of finding light in the most unexpected places. We hope this story has touched your heart the way it touched ours. At Shining Stories, we believe that every soul has a story worth telling. And sometimes, just hearing that someone else has felt what we feel is enough to remind us that we're not alone. Thank you for listening. Thank you for feeling. And most of all, thank you for believing in the healing power of stories. Until next time, take care of your heart and keep shining.